Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next session during Big Data Days 2023. And for this next session, I have a very special guest and also a very special session, which is not your typical big data or analytics session. In this session, we're going to talk about cracking the culture code through behavioral science and people analytics, a different use case of data and analytics than we typically see. I'm very happy to present to you today Hani Nabeel, who's presenting from the United Kingdom. Hani is the Chief Data and Behavioral Scientist at Eyesight Tech. At Eyesight Tech is a world-leading people analytics and behavioral science company. He's the architect and founder of the award-winning and groundbreaking CultureScope behavioral analytics platform for scientifically measuring and embedding organizations' desired culture using predictive analytics and actionable insights. Hani's work combines the best elements of scientific and applied research with a focus on organizational culture by providing groundbreaking diagnostics, delivering advanced predictive analytics, and producing actionable business insights. All of this to help organizations achieve sustainable and a competitive advantage. In 2017, CultureScope was awarded the Wharton People Analytics Award for the CultureScope solution, the only non-US company to ever receive this award. Hani recently deployed behavioral analytics as the first line of defense for financial crime for a global bank across 71 countries. Hani has over 20 years of experience delivering leadership and talent management consulting services, as well as quantitative behavioral research. Hani also has a Master of Science in Occupational Psychology and a Master of Science in Advanced Research Methods. Hani, it's your first time during Big Data Days. I'm super happy to have you during the conference this year. Welcome to Big Data Days 2023.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be with you today.
Good, thanks. The floor is yours. I'm really looking forward to your session.
Thank you. Well, before we go forward, I'm just very keen if people could open the polls and we could perhaps just look at a couple of questions. I think I need to click start on my end.
So I already opened the poll for you.
Brilliant. Okay. Really the first question is quite interesting, which is all about, do you use big data to measure organizational culture? So please go ahead and vote. I'm just really interested to see how many people actually do so. Okay. Any more? Any more?
I think the poll's already closed and the results are on the screen.
Okay, brilliant. So if I'm looking at my screen right, 71% say no. Well, that proves why we're here today, and it just shows you a point, in fact, that is quite interesting. We do use incredibly powerful data analytics for consumer analytics, for the outside world. I am here to talk a little bit about inwards. So rather than looking at customers, we're going to do people analytics. And it's interesting that culture, I guess, is the most significant thing an organization could focus and develop. And 71% don't even use big data to really understand their culture. So let me start on the next question, if I may, very quickly. So it's follow through really from the first one saying, do you even use behavioral science to measure? So if you do that, do you use behavior science? And hopefully people will go ahead and vote. And I think it seems we got mostly no as an answer, so that's even more intriguing. Am I right?
Yeah, I think the poll closed a little bit too quickly.
Right.
But yes, you're correct.
All right, that's fine. Well, welcome to our world then. 71% of the participants that we have out of 32 people say, well, actually, we don't even use big data, and none of those even think about behavior science. But actually, culture is about behavior science, isn't it? If you think about culture, it's about how people behave. It's what we stand for, our values, and how people behave. So it can't be anything really more than that. So let me take you into our journey. The first things first that I'm sure I want to address here with a few slides before we go into live examples is the what is it we do, the how do we do it, and why do we do it? Why bother? And what we do is measure behaviors and link it to outcomes. So this is really what CultureScope stands for. It's a cloud application, software as a service, cloud application. So you'll be glad to know that it's very easy to deploy within organizations today. And we've done so with many organizations right across the world, in fact, in 87 odd countries for now. And why is it different? Why should you care before we look at the how? Because that's the first thing you'd want to know. Is first and foremost, it is born out of behavior science. In fact, before it was born, which was about 7 years ago, we did spend 7 years in the lab developing such an application. And it was the largest behavior science ever done in the world, over 51,000 participants, 60 diverse organizations, 61 countries. Huge bit of research just to understand the connection between behavior science, how to measure it, diagnostics, and how to link it to, of course, outcomes. The second unique thing, which is really quite important, is that our measurement point, which has got to be valid, right? If we don't have valid data, valid input diagnostics, then, well, analytics will be rubbish, wouldn't it? But our data collection happens across two buckets. So for each person in an organization, we're interested in how they behave and what they observe, right? We'll talk a little bit. I did actually have one slide about how we collect that data. But for now, I just want you to know that actually our inputs from a behavior point of view are two and not just one. And you may wonder why already. Well, look, I don't want to overly focus on the psychology side of it, but behavior is heavily influenced by the context, right? So the environment, what's going on around me may heavily influence how I behave. It's not as fixed as you imagine it to be. And what's interesting is that we want to see how people naturally behave at work and the environment around them, what they observe, and the relationship between the two. Of course, culture is very unique. I hope we can agree that today. And ultimately, if it is unique, well, our application has got to bring that uniqueness. And it does in two obvious ways that will become, well, actually not so obvious now, but it will become obvious shortly. One is about linking it to our values. You know, it's like every organization you walk in at any time of its life journey, they would have, I don't know, 5, 4, 3, 2 big words. This is what we stand for. This is who we are, our DNA. Well, imagine if we can bring those words to life. You know, we stand for, helping our customers, being innovative, being whatever. Well, if we can show whether people walk the talk, are they actually living those values? And so the application must be able to bring those words to life. And we do that for our customers. The second thing we do, which is quite important, is linking it to business outcomes, right? And that I cannot emphasize how critical that is, because it's about what we do and the outcome that we get for it. So linking it to that is critical. It'll give us the following. One, predictive analytics, right? So what's the point of doing something if we can't predict an outcome? And ultimately, what is the actionable insight from it? So if you think in basic language, I want to tell you why something happens, right? So that's the actionable insight. So why did an event happen? Why did something great happen, right? And if you do that, then we can deploy the idea of, well, actually, I can tell you how to improve this image. Now that you know why something happened, I mean, normally you know it has happened. You don't need our insight to tell you this. Something great, something bad, something, great performance or something horrid has happened. But the fact that I can tell you why and how, here's the levers, the leading indicators, the behavioral change that you need to do. And I can give you a change roadmap. So I can tell you actually which of behaviors should you focus on first, driving which outcomes, which drive on other outcomes and other outcomes on a whole cascade. So someday I'll give you even, as you'll see later, an ROI, return on investment. change roadmap for the mathematicians around us, which I'll talk a lot about, is all around structural equation modeling, if you like, your big data. The great fun about all of this is done at app level using neural computing. So essentially, it does all the multi-level modeling, the regression analysis, it's doing even the path analysis, structural equation modeling. It does all of this by you pressing a few buttons. So we're bringing the power of all of this into our users, rather than them obviously having to spend a lot of time to study this. All of that can feed into culture by design. So how do they plan specific interventions and what levers they pull to maximize their ROI? Something that I won't have a chance to talk much about today, but at least that's something that we're feeding in and doing it. So it's really about quantitative big data approach to driving organizational culture. I promised you a little bit about this valid input, the diagnostic, and I'll make it very brief. There's a lot around behavior science and psychology here, but most of us, I'm sure, have been doing organizational questionnaires of some sort, whether be it sentiment, opinion. I'm sure you get sent these even externally. What do you think of a company? What do you think of your boss? And how do you think of your environment, and so on? All of that is great, but actually that is sentiment and not behavior. So we've got two questionnaires, remember, two buckets of data here. One would only ask about what I do at work. One will only ask about what I observe, but we're using very different techniques. You'd expect it to. So it's traditional in the type that it's questionnaire, but there's a lot of intelligence into it. So we ask scenario-based questions, right? So I'm not asking you, but you think about something. I'll put you in a scenario and I'll tell you, would you do A or B? At work, are you focused on what's A real, B possible? There is no right and wrong. It's what you do. That's the whole point of neutral non-leading. About halfway through, we use a different technique, which is what we call a matrix of 3 or 5 behaviors at any one time. And you do indicate one that you do most of at work and then one that you do least of at work. This is known as item response theory, if you love that. But ultimately, what I'm saying is we're using 2 techniques to drill down to what are those behaviors really about. So it's not a Likert scale. It's not how you feel about something, whether you agree with the statement by, if you like, a Likert scale of 5 or 10. It's simply what you do and what you observe. The clever thing is that all of this is done in real time using computer adaptive testing. So a respondent answering in real time is actually connected to the brains of CultureScope, and it's modeling validity, which is quite important. And computer adaptive testing means deploy different questions, additional questions, to get to understand to what's real. With that, we get great measurement of accuracy. So imagine here, this is a hypercharged, really fast, 12 minutes only, so very efficient way of collecting what we call 30 factors of behavior. Those 30 came out of our research. We know they matter, of place and people. And not even that, it's actually device adaptive, so it can be done on the tablet, on a phone, and it's also language adaptive. So today we have it in 12 languages, and you can change it at any point. You can see it here on the left-hand side. So really easy way, what I'm telling you, and fast way of maximizing and understanding behaviors. So a leading edge diagnostic that's critical to get good data. So the whole point of doing this is understanding a valid and quantitative measure of how things get done. But how do we bring all of this data together? So I'm going to show you 2 slides just to really bring in big data together here. The first one is kind of simpler, just to understand the concept a little bit, and then I'll probably take it a layer up. Think now if you launch this for an organization of 50, 60, 70, 100,000 people. For each person, you'll get to understand how they behave and what is it that they observe. Essentially, you get to understand, why are they doing something, if you really get to understand the place and the relationship with its people, and it's the how things happen. But really, and most excitingly, if you present just behavior data, people may go, well, that's interesting, it's behavior data, but what do we do for it? And that's why we need to connect it with what I've got on the right-hand side of the screen, with something that's quite unique to this organization. We need to understand the where, which comes with GDPR-compliant HR demographic data. And I use that carefully, so we're not after their name or where they live, but more interesting, if you like, HR demographics, but also any sort of performance, KPIs, outcome, even sentiment data. So people's opinion is an outcome of behavior, outcome of culture. Why don't we ever want to know why? Why do people feel psychologically safe for here? Why do people stay in this company? Why do they leave? Right? Do they feel inclusion around? Do they feel included in the biggest? So all of those outcomes you can bring in here. And we look at the data on the left-hand side first, behavior first. That's where we can actually customize their own values. So if they have 5 or 6 words, we use dynamic clustering of behaviors to represent their big words. So if I live our values on the left-hand side here, do I have great data? Do I have great outcomes? Actually, is it just fashionable or does it mean something? Or we can forget that and not assume anything and look at it, the outcome first. This is where a lot of cleverness around the multi-level modeling and regression analysis and path analysis comes in to say, well, actually, behavior, the outcome first, which behaviors predict this outcome? Which I would show you examples today, whether we look at behavior first or outcome first, and how does that look different in our world. And for those of us who love their IT big data, here is how it all comes together. Culture, quite important, how things get done around here. Of course, one would assume that by logic, it has got organizational outputs. Things around compliance, customer satisfaction, safety or incidents, sales. Any of those are organizational outputs. We also have organizational frameworks. I'm sure we have endless of those, one for well-being, one for integrity, inclusion. These frameworks are a few, words that we expect people to enact. It's feeling psychologically safe to speak up. Well-being, that's an important one. I'm sure you've come across many organizational frameworks. Okay, all of this is normally disconnected, of course. Now we talk about organizational culture. Historically, we love to think about values, beliefs, and history, but what we're saying, well, actually, more importantly, culture is visible to everyone outside and inside your company or organization because they see how you behave, right? Ultimately, that's what's important. And that's why we call it personal and organizational behavior. So people's DNA, that's a capability issue. Organizational DNA is opportunity and motivation to behave in that way. So I've just split why do we measure people, how they behave, and that's capability related versus organization, which means does it give me the opportunity to motivate? The exciting thing in one app, right? So we got 30 behavioral factors that we measure, is that we bring the valid diagnostic. Remember, we're measuring this stuff, right? We're measuring those 30 factors of behavior for place and its people with HR demographics so that we can understand the where. And now in one app in the cloud, we can bring in what normally is detached to your organizational utopian values. You're sitting beautifully by reception somewhere. We bring that into the framework. We're bringing in any output you like, any metric you look at to give you some pretty exciting and advanced organizational analytics. So suddenly in big data, all of that come together and you feel your organization is connected. So your values, what you stand for is connected to your behaviors, is connected to your outcomes, which I wouldn't know why you wouldn't want to do that, to be honest. I know we don't do that nowadays, but that's what we're going to do. And now that you have this, well, you've got one set of behavioral data. It's your people that make things happen. I'm sure you'd agree they'll not just happen by magic. And you can now put any lens. You can please any of your internal customers. What are we interested in? Risk. Whereas our people either have a cause risk or resolve risk. So fine, bring in your outcome data connected to the single behavior pool. Or financial and cybercrime, which is something we did work very hard to crack the code on. Operating model design. Think about learning, driving learning, driving innovation. I wish in organizational innovation is featured a lot more. Essentially, we talk about innovation as an arbitrary thing out there, but actually, the place could heavily influence whether you drive innovation or not. Transformation, we forget the people and their behavior in transformation. And in fact, as we know, to go to any metrics that you see on the internet, most transformations fail down to people, not down to systems, as well as what drives well-being, what drives inclusion. I remove the word diversity because you can do diversity on your own. inclusion as a behavior is a lot more trickier, and you really need to understand, is this place inclusive to all, regardless of gender, belief, color, and all the rest of it? Likewise, performance. Don't you want to understand, your performance? How is it linked to behaviors? And finally, M&A, which I'm sure in mergers and acquisitions, sadly, you hear this often in the news, it fails because of culture, right? Behaviors look all obscure for two different organizations coming together. And again, if you know what you need to preserve and the outcome it drives, it gives you what we call in our world, and used quite successfully, is post-merger culture integration, if that can mean something to you. So let us go into some examples. Behavior first. Remember, I said to you today, I'll give you examples, and we'll get many of them around behavior first, and then we'll look at outcome first. So here's a company basically that's going to present me with a challenge, first of all, saying we've got a framework around risk. I don't want you to overly focus on this because we got it in the handout. But you may be intrigued to know, well, what behaviors do we valid measure? We talked about 30 factors of behavior. We've discovered in our research that behavior is a two-way street measurement. So there are 30 factors, but 15 dimensions, i.e. there are two that are opposites, what we call a dichotomy. And if you love your behavior science, you're welcome to look at those and what they mean. I'll keep telling you what they mean as we go on. But that's our base measurement. And you see here two interesting radar diagrams, one for people, one for place. The blue one is for people, how they behave and what they observe. And if you don't have to look too hard to think, wow, there are similarities and there is also tension, big differences. But I'm sure you agree with me, that looks like a lovely picture. It means nothing to me. I'm not interested. What does it tell me? It tells me nothing. You're quite right. Well, let's bring it to life. That's the important bit now. If we're going to deliver insight, we've got to talk to everyone in the company. Well, we're going to go from that complex image of saying, here is the client's framework, judgment, accountability, and not a bystander, right? It's a risk framework. We want people to make good judgment. We want them to be accountable for what they do, and they need to speak up, not stand by and watch things happen. I'm sure for any of us, whether you're in a bank, an oil and gas company, or even a nuclear site, of our customer nuclear energy, you need such a framework. But do we live this framework or not? Well, the first thing we do is work with them to map which culture scope behaviors really underpin this framework. You'll see in a moment how it does actually. It doesn't mean I'm canceling the rest of the results, no, but I have now 8 behaviors that underpin this framework. That's what we're going to focus on to help understand the first question that we have. Are we living our framework? If not, why? That's what they need to know now. Are we or not? A lot of the time they want to show this to regulators if you're interested. And if you love our big data, normally I hide this, but it's important to know that actually we need to know the what and the where to get to know the why and the how. What I'm trying to say is, realistically, you need to add a lot of data to make it interesting. Things like KPIs, sentiment, gender, location, work group, obviously GDPR compliant demographics. Or, well, not or and actually, rather, we need to understand the people and the place to see whether the set behaviors, those 8, are aligned and strong. Misaligned, the problem is really the place, so it's present for the people. Double negative, God help us, it's absent for place and people, your double drag. And obviously, then understanding it's misaligned, but actually it's the people. So the place is there, the opportunity is there, but with the capability isn't there yet. And now we can simplify, because we got to show them simple data to internal customers into simple heat maps. So we got away from the complex radar diagrams into something simple. And here, I don't want to over labor this, but you've got basically each function. That's how we got the data. Large set of data for this organization, over 11,000. You get to see in the framework, how do people behave, what they observe. It's their own words. Great. So they're not lost in the words here. And ultimately, without having to work too hard, you get to see, wow, psychological safety here, not a bystander. Being able to speak up is really where the problem is. We're not going to focus on that. And really, it's both the place and the people, right? But why? You're going to ask why. And maybe for each of those departments, divisions, functions, there's a different why, but let me just demonstrate one. If we go into the risk function itself, imagine, God help us, basically what we're saying are the behaviors are most absent. Now, what am I showing you here is the 8 behaviors only for one function, and I promised to show you how we map them. So we mapped our scientific behaviors into the words. So now they know what levers, what behaviors they need to work on, and is it the place or people? So critically here, it's the place for 2 behaviors, people for 1. What does that mean? Expressive, it's the people. They don't know when to express their opinion. They just don't. You think they do, but they don't. You need to train that. The place needs to bring in the opportunity and the motivation to become more achievement focused. What does that mean? The opposite is status. There will be currently status, i.e., my job titles, how long I've been here, means I don't care about risk. Actually, no, it's only as good as what you do next. And delivery focus, hey, you're accountable for what you do next and what you're doing now. But those are organizational interventions, and this is a capability, it's a people intervention. Just being able to split that shows you it's not just all about training and development, organizational culture, policies, procedures, hell, even furniture can actually drive behavior. And that's what you need to think at the place. Well, that's using their own framework. So I'm going to ask the question, or is it? Because that's their yardstick, their framework. I'm going to forget that. I want to throw that away. Remember, we were doing behavior first approach. Now I'm going to do outcome approach. Here we go. So you've got to have a valid outcome, first of all. I'm sure for those of us who love to bring in data, will, I'm sure, support me on this data cleansing and a real data. And of course, I want to bring in data that matters. So data for Speak Up. What does this organization have? Well, for 11,000 people, they have a hard metric, what I call a soft metric. Soft metric is in their sentiment items. You know, the engagement survey, they ask many times, you know, on a scale 1 to 5, you know, how are you likely to speak up? You know, do you have a fear of speaking up? Do you think people speak up without fear of negative consequence? It's an opinion, but it's an outcome. But also they brought in a complex outcome around the volume and severity of incidents being reported. And by the way, in any industry you are, I'm sure you collect this data now. Anything from here's a broken chair to fraud to, well, if you're a nuclear reactor, it's about to leak and explode. But you do monitor those things. Now we bring those in. Obviously, we measured the behaviors of place and people. The first question is, for those 2 outcomes together, is it the people or the place that predict that outcome, and which behaviors predict this outcome? So which behaviors we're going to focus on? Show me the road to greatness. And this is where it does the multi-level modeling, then all the appropriate regression to tell you for that singular or double outcome, actually 3 behaviors predict this. It's about the people, not just what you do. It's about being able to express your opinion, and it's about obeying the rules and regulations and treating people fairly. That's what these words mean. Now, what's interesting is it's not what our customer here thought. Well, they nailed expressive. That's not difficult. But they thought it was delivery. Wow, that's the opposite of people. It's also about achievement, nothing to do with conformity. So you could have worked on the wrong levers, got the wrong results, but now actually you could work on the right levers. 3 behaviors predict those 2 outcomes. Okay? So what? What will I get back for it? What's my ROI? Why should I even care? I'm a manager. Now, it's up to you guys. Obviously, you can go and tell them about the multiple R and the significant F and error rates and all that good data talk. They may not get it. But showing them a unique way, which we've discovered is really powerful, called the odds ratio, they get it. Here we go. A simple diagram here. The behaviors are plotted on the x-axis and the outcome is plotted on the y-axis. Basically here, the more the behaviors, those 3 behaviors together that we found are interesting, are present, the more likely you are to get your outcome. So where those 3 behaviors are really present, you are 26 times more likely to drive those outcomes you were interested in. I mean, most people would say, show me the way, I'm running with you. That's it. Of course, before they run away, we'll remind them, if you don't focus on those behaviors, i.e. if they're slightly present, imagine you are working twice against your outcome. And your ROI just goes up the more you focus on those behaviors. Of course, brilliant, but that doesn't answer the question of where. It told me how, so I told you why it's not happening, or why it is happening. I can tell you how to improve it, but I do need to tell you where. And for those of us who love big data, look at this. I've taken the same data here for 11,000 people, 3 behaviors. I've given you the classic dispersion of us. Hopefully you data guys would love this. But what's nice about it, you see, this is real data here that I'm anonymizing, of course, the normal distribution, brilliant. But what's interesting is you see the place and people, right? And ultimately, and never mind who's place and people, I know you see it's the blue, it's really the people, and magenta is the place. But really what's important is, can we know who's in that box here, in that zone here? This zone, imagine, I do, place does, it's the right outcome. Who are they in your company? Who are they in the organization? Can we learn from them? Because what we can borrow from them, maybe it's the type of water they have, the food, I don't know. We can bring that to where we are in danger. In danger today, I mean, God help us, the terrible outcome hasn't happened. But in terms of risk management, you can imagine, I don't, place doesn't, it's already the wrong outcome, event-driven, God help us. That's your next line, headline use, if you like, in big data. Incredibly powerful stuff when you get to know the where. Obviously, you can produce a heat map for both of those. Of course, intervention monitoring becomes important. Now that you know you just focus on those 3 behaviors, now you know there are people that you've learned from and people that you need to sort out, right? So for 8,000 people, we deployed interventions. I know you'd love to know what they are, run the roams for today, but it's incredible where there are people we've learned from, so we know it works here and here. We implemented the change with this group and that group. And interestingly, and you can see how long for 8,000 people behavior change took. It took about 3 quarters to really take off. Wow, it has started working. So what does this line show me? The 3 behavior improvement and the 2 outcomes. I am monitoring the outcome integrated in that one line. So it's not just the behaviors going up, actually we're getting nowhere. And that's brilliant when you tie those together in one diagram. And you can see over 3 quarters or 4 quarters, I mean, almost 9 months, we've really been able to make a difference and stop some really horrid stuff perhaps happening with this. So I just want to bring a couple of quick stories just to show you how the same data was used in other outcomes, and then maybe draw a path for you to talk about the final bit of the jigsaw puzzle. Predicting trust. I mean, it's the hardest thing to predict, isn't it? Whether people trust you or not. Do our employees trust us? Do our customers trust us even? I mean, it's a valid question. So you have this, and you know it's the outcome is yes or no. They either do or they don't, but you don't know why. That's the frustrating thing. Is that, well, how can we improve this picture even? Well, we don't know even why. When I link it to behaviors, wow, it's another set of behaviors here that come up. Team focus, active learning, conformity. Yeah, you've got to play with the team. It's about team objectives. Invest in your learning in line with the job. We obey the rules and regulations. When those 3 together comes in, you get trust. Wow, listen up, leaders. These are the levers you can pull. Now, interestingly enough, we've seen conformity before, haven't we? Let's see. I'll tell you why in a moment. Another quick image here. Why should you care? Well, when you have those 3 behaviors are present, you are 82 times likely to get trust. People say, I do trust when those 3 behaviors are present. A reason why you should do it. Same data, we add a bit of well-being, and there are many, many different, I'm sure, metrics for well-being. For today's simplicity, we also had some items they didn't understand around whether managers take well-being into consideration or not. And the importance of doing so, linking it with behaviors, gave us 4 behaviors here that are a predictor. People focus. We've seen that before. Active learning. Well, we've seen that before. Conformity and expressive. All of those existed in the 2 models I showed you. Do you see what I'm getting at? If you affect more than one behavior, you can get multiple outcomes if you understand root cause analysis. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you next. Obviously, that's the model for well-being. You're 28 times more likely to get well-being when those behaviors are there. But I'm really excited to bring it all together. Is there a connection between those three outcomes, since we've seen some similar behaviors that drive this outcome? And where do we work first? And that's the jigsaw puzzle that we do answer here. In fact, there is a starting point, and you need to work on trust first. There are the three behaviors that drive trust. Now you can ask where. Where are they present or absent in the company, in the organization? But that is your first step, because you get trust right, it will heavily influence psychological safety from a speak-up perspective. There are two other behaviors that are not present in your starting point you need to focus on. And all of this will give you for free well-being. Now, what's interesting, this company was investing almost millions in different programs, just driving those three things separately. And we're saying, stop, don't do that. Go to trust first. Here are the behaviors. You'll get your speak up. Here are the behaviors you're going to work on. You're going to get well-being for free. While obviously they thought well-being is having nice monitors and hampers and so on, actually, we're talking about behaviors that drive well-being. Significant change. Now, there are some really interesting stories in the handout if you want to see. I don't want to go into them today, but we had, just to show you the complexity and simplification, a client that had 12 outcomes. We were interested to understand each of those outcomes. I'll give you an example of one of those outcomes, whether it happens or not. And we were able to actually draw two paths for them. But what was really interesting is to understand each path on its own, but the merit of connecting them together. And if they just focus on three behaviors, first layer intervention, they get 6 outcomes. You see an ROI here. Wow, just pull 3 levers, I get 6 outcomes. Later on, if I pull another 3 levers, really do them well, I'm going to get additional 5 outcomes. So you can suddenly see the leading indicators and what outcomes they produce. So it's in the handout. Now you know how to read it. You might find it fascinating. I want to give more time now for questions, because I think that's really important. Particularly is, I love this saying here, for each organization, and the important thing is not to stop questioning, because curiosity has so many reasons for existing. The great quote by Albert Einstein, I hope you'd agree. So yeah, let's open it for questions. I'm seeing a blank screen in front of me here because it's harder to see the questions. So Let me look at my second monitor and hand it back to Jean.
No worries, Hani. So, before I start moderating the questions, let me just say that I thought this was a very, very cool and interesting presentation, and never seen anything like it so far in the way that you're using your data. So I think this was actually a very, very interesting lecture, and most people on the screen agree with me. So a couple of key comments I first wanted to give. First is a comment from Cesara saying, so it seems that today's all this is happening, at least in large organizations, but it's done manually in a dispersed way, where the dots are being connected by humans in a rather subjective way. Now I get it. It is designed and spinned properly. There should be a chance for faster, more objective results. It's brilliant. So just wanted to kind of start with that comment first.
Exactly what we want to do. This stuff should not be complicated in our day and age. It is still all separate, segregated on systems, not connected, not helpful.
Very interesting.
Gives you no insight.
Then let's move towards some questions. The first one is from John Weezy. How will executive management take action to help firm performance with all this data? Are we, as we know, executives have little time to analyze or do something with this?
I agree. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But the sad truth at the moment is if we only use sentiment, engagement, looking at outcomes, we go and hit management with a book about that thick, saying here is 50, 60, 30, doesn't matter, outcomes. Can you go and fix those? And they go, no, I haven't got time. I've got a day job. I've got to work here, right? However, if you say, I've analyzed this for you, And if you focus on 4 behaviors that can solve 50, 60 outcomes, are you interested? They go, yeah, now I am. Well, let me tell you what they mean. And let me tell you what interventions we can do to fix those behaviors. And if you do that, you're going to get your 60, 70, 30 outcomes. Now we're talking. That's language they get. At the moment, we're not helping them.
Very interesting. So the other question is from Jean-Paul. How to select a set of behavior whose combination would lead to a great outcome in an organization? And I think that this is the $1 million question, right?
Is the $1 million question. Sadly, at the moment, we don't know. With this tool, you get a chance to know what is the biggest bang for your buck. So think about an organization. If you're trying to drive mass improvement or performance or change, and I love it, people say to me, I'm focused on performance, or I'm focused on change. No. These are the outcomes. You can't focus on it. You got to focus on the people. And if I can tell you, rather than boiling the ocean, because if you're doing change or driving that's what you're doing, let me tell you the 1 or 2 behaviors that actually, if you just really drive those in your culture, you're going to get the biggest return. That's what I'm focused on. Yeah, you may say to me, well, some other areas may need some other behaviors or other, how can I select what? It's fine. We can go to that level of detail. At the moment, the basics are saying, is there something incredibly powerful we can do that can drive mega outcomes? Big data simplified. And that's what I mean by language, that can we really bring. I mean, most boards, believe it or not, I talk about their culture inside 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Let me tell you exactly the best levers you can drive and will you get back for it. You want it? Yeah. And now I get buy-in to really drive behavior change, nudge, whatever. Some of those are really simple to drive those behaviors. Now you get buy-in.
Yeah, very interesting. Good. Another question that just came in, and I think this is also one that has been touched upon in various other sessions in terms of machine learning, algorithms, and all the likes, is what are the ethical considerations should organizations keep in mind when you're doing these kinds of behavioral analytics? And I think that's a very excellent question.
It is, yeah. So I've got an answer for that, which is working today. Obviously, we evolve. Number 1 is we never collect personal data. We're not linking it to a person. We're interested in behaviors and outcomes. And we never zoom in on one person because that's not helpful. Yeah. Number two, which is really quite important, we never report for n equals less than 5.
Yeah.
And it is organizational analytics, not individual analytics, right? So keep the focus. And we're using mass psychometry, mass psychology to understand organization. So that's helping us keep it at bay and obviously in compliance with GDPR, which we believe in and is important in our compliance with every bank and nuclear and energy company that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I fully think that these considerations are becoming more and more important, and that's also why we see a lot of questions around this coming up. But I agree with, as long as you're able to anonymize this and have a massive enough data set that it's not traceable anymore, then yeah, I think it's something that you could say is a safe use. Hani, we're getting towards the end of our session. I could easily listen to you for another hour because I thought this was a very well delivered, very inspiring, and as I mentioned all the way at the start, definitely something that is new, something that not a lot of us have heard about before. So I actually personally learned a lot around what behavioral analytics is and what it can do. So thank you so much for being part of Big Data Days. It's absolutely been a pleasure to listen to you. You can definitely expect an invitation for next year. And this was very, very inspiring. So thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you for everyone listening in. Thank you. Have a great day ahead.
Thanks. Speaking about great days, let me share very briefly about the great day we've had so far and also the great day that we're about to end. because time flies, especially when you're having fun. And we only have one session left for you for the first day of Big Data Days. Like other speakers that we've seen so far, we have a very, very good closing keynote for you today, because we're going to be listening to Jordan Morrow, who's the VP and Head of Data and Analytics of Brainstorm, and maybe even more importantly, the author of 2 books, Be Data Literate and Be Data Driven.
Sorry about this.
Some of the main things that we're going to be looking at in the next upcoming keynote. So we're really looking forward to closing the day with you today. So make sure you don't miss this very, very engaging speaker, which will start in around 15 minutes. See you soon for the last session of Big Data Days.